We're talking about India and the US. Both these countries are trying to chalk out a deal to mitigate the impact of tariffs. Now, the US President Donald Trump has signaled that his administration is willing to consider putting more pressure on India. And this time, it's going to be over agricultural exports. This has caused many rice stocks to trade under pressure. That kind of pressure was evident in trade. In fact, stocks of companies like LT Foods, KRBL, all of these dipped more than 6%. Stocks of Kohinoor Foods has tanked further down, more than 9% in trade if you look at today's action. So the fall has been triggered after Donald Trump has said that the US government is going to investigate claims from American farmers that express concern over the kind of dumping that is being talked about of low-price rice into the American market, especially, they say, from countries like India, Thailand, and China. This is the word that we got from the American president about this.
We do believe that countries are dumping rice into this country today. We've never seen imports this great.
Which countries?
India, Thailand, even China into Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico used to be one of the largest markets for U.S. rice. We haven't shipped rice into Puerto Rico in years. So this has been happening for years. This didn't start during your administration, but unfortunately, we're seeing it in a much bigger way now. The tariffs are working, but we need to double down because
you want more. I mean,
well, they're cheating, right? They're they're just subsidizing and then
India. Tell me about India. Why is India allowed to do that? They have to pay tariffs. Do they have an exemption on rice?
No, sir. We're still working on their trade deal. So
yeah, but they should be dumping. I mean, I heard that from others. So you can't do that.
There's a WTO case against India right now.
Give me the countries, if you could. Go ahead. India, who else?
So India.
Mark it down. What'd you say?
Yes, sir.
India, Thailand, China into Puerto Rico, not into the continental U.S., but into Puerto Rico. Those are the main culprits.
Well, that's the kind of interaction taking place within the Trump administration and the possibility of higher tariffs on rice imports into the U.S., the kind of exports that India is doing towards the U.S. When it comes to rice. In reply to that, tax rice imports, now the Indian Rice Exporters Federation is saying that sales to America are completely based on demand. So according to the rice exporters body, the American buyers place orders in advance and only then is rice actually shipped. They have further underscored that despite the duties hiking to as much as 40%, Indian rice exports to America, those haven't stopped. And the official statement has further pointed out that the US is the 4th largest market for Indian Basmati rice in particular, and the 24th largest for non-Basmati rice exports. This is also reflective in the fact that in FY25, India has already sent Basmati rice worth $337 million to the United States. And moreover, clarifying on this robust demand, the body has said that most of this extra duty cost has been passed on to American buyers and consumers, because of which prices received by Indian farmers and exporters have stayed broadly stable as of now. But let's get further perspective. Chandrashekhar is joining us. He's an agri economist and a commodity expert. Mr. Chandrashekhar, glad you could join us on this broadcast, but tell us about the kind of impact that we are seeing in India. Yes, no doubt the stocks have reacted, like I was telling our viewers, but do you think this is genuine downside risk for Indian rice exporters right now, the possibility that there could be higher tariffs on rice exports to America?
I call this a tragic comedy because I suspect the US is barking up a wrong tree. I'm being very plain in saying this. And why am I saying this? Number one, there is no dumping from India. The definition of dumping is if India were to sell rice to the US below the local market price in India, then it will be dumping. No, we export Basmati rice to India. About 275,000 tons was the export in 24-25. And our prices, export prices, were not lower than the domestic prices. Therefore, there is no dumping, really speaking. Probably somebody in the US assumes that India is exporting too much. But they want to call it dumping, but it's certainly not dumping. This is number one. Number two, the US does not produce Basmati rice. Therefore, Indian rice, basmati rice, does not compete with US rice. Okay, and whereas Indian basmati rice caters to a very specific demand segment within the United States, which is basically the expatriate population, Asian and Middle Eastern population who ask for basmati rice for their cooking, etc., for their food, and then therefore. Number one, there's no dumping. Number two, basmati rice does not compete with US cultivated rice, and therefore there is miscommunication to the president of the United States by whoever has complained.
Fair enough.
And then, yeah.
So once you assume that what the American president is hearing may not be entirely harbored in truth, this entire line that is, which is that. The Rice Exporters Federation is saying that shipments are made to the US only when there is demand, when they get advance orders. Is that how the system operates? Because if that is the case, then does it suitably weaken the farmers' case in the US, both legally and commercially, you think, if that is indeed true?
Actually, the farmers in the US are not affected by export of basmati rice from India. That's the first proposition. The entire argument is misplaced, number one. Number two, someone within the US assumes that Indian rice, basmati rice that enters the United States is competing with locally produced, US produced rice. But US does not produce basmati rice. And all our exports are against import orders received from the United States. And we service a particular segment of demand. And therefore, my sense, this argument will die down. There is a delegation from the US which is in India between today and tomorrow. I would expect the government of India to explain to that delegation, US trade representatives, that the entire
do you think it could be Mr. Chandrashekhar, do you think this could be a sticky point right now, where India is trying to safeguard its own agricultural interests when it comes to this FTA that we are trying to strike with the United States? How much of an issue do you think this is, and how much is it connected to the possibility of a deal getting cracked?
No, I don't think there is any nexus between my view between this threat of additional tariffs on Indian rice and the BTA which is being negotiated, the bilateral trade agreement. I think that this is an entirely different issue as far as rice is concerned, because someone from the US, an exporter, an American company from the US, has complained to the White House and to their Commerce Department and whatever. And that's how this entire talk has come in. So I honestly do not read too much into this. I'm not saying this is an empty threat, but this threat is not based on the factual position.
And from an investor's perspective, Mr. Chandrashekhar, perhaps you can help us understand, because we've seen these rice stocks reacting to headlines today. Is there a risk to earnings visibility when you talk about our exporters, our rice exporters, because investigations are going to translate into anti-dumping duties? And if that happens, of course, until that happens, the overhang on these stocks could continue. Wouldn't you agree?
First of all, there is no dumping, and we should be able to prove that it's not a case of dumping.
How is that? How does that happen, Mr. Chandrashekhar?
No,
how do you go about proving that there is no dumping?
Yes. What is dumping? If an Indian exporter were to sell to the US importer a basmati rice at a price lower than the India's domestic price, then it is called dumping. But in this case, our export prices and our domestic prices are more or less the same. In fact, the basmati is such a premium rice that no Indian exporter will sell it at a discount. That is important. And second, it does not hurt the US paddy grower or rice grower, because these two varieties are very different. US does not cultivate the basmati rice. And the third one, yes, there is a talk. We heard the president saying, the US president saying that we should levy additional tariffs. But my sense is can potentially die down, is my view.
So
because there's no
potentially-
justification. There's no justification.
Right. No, but this kind of reliance that we have for several of our exports on the US, is there a diversification that is currently underway when you talk about Indian rice exports? Because you have mentioned how unique Indian Basmati rice is and how important that is for America. But about alternative markets for India, how much of that piece has been delved into?
In fact, our Basmati rice export is very well diversified. Believe me, at least more than 24 countries in the world. Saudi Arabia is the largest buyer of Indian Basmati rice. And therefore, we are not reliant on the US market. 275, 300,000 tons of Basmati rice is not a small quantity, but our total Basmati rice export is in excess of 4 million tons. And therefore, our reliance on the US market is not big.
Sure.
And second, even if assuming that the US is going to impose additional tariffs over and above the 50% tariff, the US consumers, I'm sure, would be willing to absorb that additional tariff, which will raise their cost, of course, which will raise their price, but they have already absorbed the 50% tariff on Indian rice. And
Correct.
even if there is anything additional, there will be protests within the US, and I'm sure the government of the United States will start thinking about all of this, the repercussions with the consumers.
That really helps clear the picture, because despite the tough rhetoric and market jitters that we've seen, the fundamentals of India's rice exports, they remain demand-driven, and they sound pretty resilient from the picture that you painted for us. But any investigation or any tariff action is going to matter. For now, of course, pricing power, advanced contracts, and perhaps steady global demand. Those are going to cushion Indian farmers and exporters. Mr. Chandrashekhar, thank you very much for joining us and giving us clarity on this issue.
Thank you.